Hey guys, Stephanie here with the Hydroponic Tower channel. Today, I don't know if you can tell, but I am organizing seeds and I'm going to be starting my fall crops. So I thought I would take you guys along and show you how I organize my seeds or how I'm organizing them now. I've done this differently in the past, so this is a new system for me. And talk about what I'm going to plant for my fall gardens. These are things that can go outside while it's still cold because we're having super warm days, and this will depend on your region. Our last frost is after Mother's Day, so I can't put anything like tomatoes or cucumbers or anything like that are frost tender outside until after that date, unless I want to move the towers in and out, which is definitely a possibility and what I'll probably do in a couple of weeks. But I can get all my cool weather crops growing and outdoors, and they can handle a frost totally fine. So I'll share with you guys what I'm starting there. Also, I want to talk about, is it worth the cost? I get that question so often that I thought we'd just break it down while I'm working here, and we'll kind of just tackle this task together and have a little conversation about growing your own food and is it worth the cost, and then worth the cost using aeroponics, because there is an investment component if you're going to use a growing system or some sort of system to grow your food. Now there's an investment cost when you're growing in the soil as well, so I'll address that as well. This thing right here, this is called a Nimbot, and it's a little printer. I'll put a link to it below. I found it on Amazon, and you use the app and you just type in what you want to write. Super simple. So I have been typing in all of the different categories of plants that I have, and then I invested in these plastic tubs. I've seen other YouTubers and gardeners using these. They usually use the clear ones with the clear inserts. I decided to go with the dark color, not because I really like these colors or anything, but because I do keep the garage door open in here, and we have a lot of overhead lighting and we have a lot of tower garden lighting. So I wanted to protect my seeds from light, because light and moisture and temperatures are the things you want to control when it comes to seeds. So what I'm doing is I got 2 of these, and I'm going to put a label on them, and I'm just getting my seeds organized because they have been pretty much a hot mess for a while, and what's happened is I've fallen behind on seeds starting and knowing the things that I want to start for our diet. So this just gives me a better way to like open this and go, oh yeah, I'm about to be out of dill, or it's time to start tomatoes. It kind of just gives me a visual guide so that I don't forget to grow certain things. I have not grown Chervil, for example, all winter. It's one of my favorite things to grow indoors, and I haven't even been growing it because I just totally forgot about it. I got busy planting other things, so I just found those seeds. So we're gonna get this labeled and chat as we go. So first thing, spinach, and I'm going to be making a video on spinach. I think spinach can be really tricky for people on germinating, but I have a couple of varieties here that I really like, and I've shared in the past. Spinach is a small plant, produces a little bit of food. So when you get baby green spinach, it's because they're planting a ton of seeds and then harvesting them. So I've got some varieties that are larger. These can get around, some of these are just larger leaf lettuce. So I'm gonna be working on some of this. So I'm glad to have these organized. So it's just easier to remember that this is a project I wanna work on. So is the cost worth it? So as the season's changing, I was outside this morning planning out my gardens for the outdoors. So I do grow in the soil still in raised beds, and then I have permaculture, what I call a permaculture potager, and I use permaculture principles to grow berries and herbs and other things. Those are things I grow outside for a couple of reasons. A lot of medicinal herbs are really large plants, and these are my dwarf tomatoes, and they need a couple of seasons. They're perennials, so they're not suited, like echinacea, for example, doesn't flower till the 2nd year typically. These are plants that need to be established in the ground. Obviously, blueberries and honeyberries, those are bushes that need to have need to be grown in the soil. So those are the kinds of things that I'm growing in my permaculture landscaping or my permaculture potager. And then I have some raised beds for the things I can't grow on the towers, like onions, carrots, potatoes. I prefer to grow my radish in a raised bed just because I can eat so many. I grow them on the towers, and they're great for having a radish to add to a salad a couple of times a week, but I can also eat several handfuls roasted, and I like to eat a ton of radish, so I'll grow some of those in my raised beds. And so I'll be sharing more of that and just how to make that simple and sustainable as well, because that is the goal with everything I'm doing. I'm trying to find the most affordable way to grow the maximum amount of food with the least amount of work possible and the least amount of resources possible. Just so you guys kind of know like my vision and what I'm doing here. That's why I'm always pushing the limits on the towers. I'm waiting until my seedlings are really large before they're going into the tower, because they're taking up space in the tower if I put them in too early, and they're sitting there doing nothing where something else can be growing and producing food while those are on the grow station. So I'm always turning things around and growing things for the purpose of getting the most food using affordable systems that are simple to use. So I'm doing that whether I'm growing in the soil or growing indoors on the towers or whatever other system I'm using. So that's sort of my purpose there, kind of coining the frame, like alternative growing methods. I'm kind of working on a name for that, because I do want to launch a podcast around this topic of like alternative growing methods for the purpose of health and food freedom and food control. So I haven't quite coined like that name or what that mission is yet. But that's what I'm doing here. So the towers are a huge part of that. And the question gets brought up, are they worth the cost? Because they are an expensive thing to invest in, especially when you're first getting started and you have to make that initial investment, right? So I addressed this on a reel recently. I brought this topic up. And when it comes to the cost of any system I'm talking about, there is sort of a difference in like where you're at in the journey on whether this is sticker shock and very expensive, or if it's like, oh, this is a no-brainer, right? And that doesn't mean like the one person has more disposable income than the other. It's just we come at this with a different perspective based on where you're at as far as gardening experience and how important it is to you to have access to your own homegrown food. I have been a gardener for 20 years, over 20 years now, using many, many different methods. I have invested a tremendous amount of money into compost, into gardening supplies, into amendments, into raised beds that were made out of wood. Like I had some cedar beds once, really nice. And I don't have anything to show for those things. The compost it goes back into the earth. It runs out of goodness in it. The things we buy compost for, we're getting animal manures that have been composted down because they're high in minerals and nutrients, and those things get depleted when you garden in them. So we're adding new compost every year. And yes, you can build living soil. That's what my permaculture gardens are for. They're for the purpose of adding that compost once and then doing chop and drop and adding other things that are just naturally around our property, like waste from the towers, old plants, roots, things like that are composting down and building soil naturally. And those things are amazing, but I have never been able to replace the grocery store with my permaculture gardens. I had a permaculture food forest in Florida. These are all my cabbages. And it was incredible, and I love permaculture. I love growing my own soil. It doesn't replace the grocery store. I can't grow eggplant and have enough for a year's supply of eggplant in my permaculture gardens. It just can't. And so I have invested over the years in compost to grow in the soil or to grow in raised beds. And again, that compost, you use up the goodness in it and you have to add more, and you may be building a good base layer, but we still have to add amendments when we're soil gardening. When you're growing in raised beds, my nice, beautiful cedar beds, eventually they wore down, broke down, and they became garbage. They weren't there anymore. I built some here when we first moved in that have since, same thing. We get a lot of moisture here and they are no longer around, right? And so those are things I've spent a lot of money on that I don't have anything to show for because they don't last. And so for me, an investment into a tower is absolutely worth the cost because I know I'm gonna have it in 20 years. These aren't gonna break down. They're here for the duration, right? So they're not going anywhere. I don't have to worry about that. I only have to make that investment once and then I'm done. So for me, because I've spent so much on soil gardens and growing food and not having anything to show for that year after year, aside from the food that we harvested from that seasonal crop, which is typically a pretty short period of time, and you're not getting a yearly harvest where you can come out every single day and have something fresh to put in your body. So to me, like being able to spend my money on something that I know I can grow on continually is a no-brainer. And so the cost of the towers for me, or even my raised beds, I also use Vigo metal raised beds, which are pretty expensive. They're not gonna go anywhere. They're going to last my lifetime. I'm not gonna have to worry about rebuilding beds and investing in more wood and materials, not to mention most wood is treated, so you have the issue of, you know, those chemicals leaching into your food if you're using wood that's untreated. I don't have to worry about those things because my metal beds are going to last. Now I do have to add compost to my raised beds and I have to continue to build up the soil because soil depletes and soil shrinks, but those beds are worth the cost. So I can grow the things that can't grow in here. So for me personally, because I have spent so much over the years on food, on things to go into a garden, including labor, so much labor and time, these don't feel very expensive to me. But if you are brand new to gardening and this is a brand new concept, then it can seem very expensive to get started. So that's sort of the first thing I wanted to address. A lot of it is just perspective on where you're coming at and where you're coming from. The other is the cost of food at the grocery store and how much you care about the quality. So there's a side of me that even if I couldn't grow food less than I could pay for it at the grocery store, I would still grow it, even if it cost me more, which it did when I was growing in the soil. It cost me more to grow food in the soil than it cost me to get it at the grocery store. And I follow a lot of homesteaders. And now that some of them have bigger channels and are growing a lot more food and have the means to sort of branch out and grow a lot more food, you can tell just on what they buy, they're not concerned about the cost going into growing that food at all. And I can see that in like the quality of compost they're buying just to start their seedlings is incredibly expensive compost just for seed starting. And I did the math once when I was watching a YouTuber starting her seedlings in this expensive compost and then putting them into a raised bed that had this expensive seed starting material, and then had put them into a raised bed with all this expensive compost. And I did the math on that because I could tell she showed how many bags she added and how many she did to start her seeds. And it was easily paying double the cost for like a head of broccoli than you would at the grocery store with everything that had to be put into that system. That is somebody who is more concerned about having homegrown food and doesn't mind paying more for homegrown over the grocery store. For the experience of gardening, a lot of it, for the purpose of content creation, that does make a difference in what you're investing in. And for having fresh food that you get to grow that you know isn't contaminated and you know where your food came from. Like I mentioned, I've done that. I've done it with chickens too. It's not hard to get in a situation where you have too many chickens and you're feeding them high quality feed, and all of a sudden you are basically paying more for your homegrown chicken eggs than if you just bought them organic at the grocery store. It doesn't take much to get into that kind of situation when you're growing your own food, especially these days where we've moved away from just tilling You know, if you can go out and just till the soil and plant your food and get some green beans, a lot of my neighbors do that. That is an effective way to save a lot of money growing food. But you're, again, just getting a few items that then need to be preserved, and then it's over, like green beans and tomatoes, and then you have to start, and then you wait until next season to have any food. So you're not really replacing the grocery store in that kind of system. These are kohlrabi. So I'm organizing my cabbages and things right now. And some broccoli. So with the towers, and even with like my raised beds, the one benefit with the raised beds and how you can keep your costs down if you're doing like a Vigo raised bed, and I'll show more of this content as we move into spring, but I can build the base of that raised bed up, and a huge part of it using what we call hugelkultur, which is taking logs and wood chips and you're building a base that's going to break down over time. Now as it breaks down, it shrinks, which leaves us the issue of having to build up the top of the soil, but it does put off heat as it's breaking down, which makes your beds warmer earlier in the spring, so you can garden a little bit earlier. It adds a lot of moisture, so in the hottest part of the season, in the summer, plant roots can go deep into that to pull water out if they're thriving for water. So there's a lot of benefits to that, and you can continue to add material, like I'll add leaf mulch to mine at the end of the season, and then I worm compost so that I can add some worm composting in there for nutrients so that I don't have to amend the soil, and then I also have some chickens so I can use some chicken compost. But I do want to be a homesteader, and what I mean by a homesteader is somebody that grows the majority of our food year round. And so I am always looking for, how do I do that, like I mentioned, in a way that's affordable, easy, simple, and gives us exactly what we need without a lot of waste and a lot of unnecessary input, energy-wise, and things like that. So with the towers, you do have the initial investment, but the growing cost on the towers is significantly lower than when I was growing in the soil. And when you're growing in the soil, if you're starting your own seeds, so like I mentioned, I'm gonna do my metal beds, and I'm using the things on our property because I'm doing it at a small scale. I've got the means, for the most part. I do have to buy some compost to get them started, but I've got the amendments from the worms and the chickens and things to make those sustainable at a small scale, at a very small scale, right? As long as I'm starting my seeds for those gardens on my own, then that's a huge savings once I get those systems set up, because I don't have to buy the metal beds again, and I don't have to add a ton of compost. I may need to add a little bit. So there is a cost associated with growing outdoors, but if I'm starting my own seeds, I'm starting them for pennies on the dollar, and you can save a lot that way. I will say my raised beds cost more per food item to grow food than the towers. And the reason is, this is Cherville. The reason is the towers, the growing cost is really small once you get them. Once you get the towers, the growing cost is really small. Our investment is rock wool, because we're growing in a rock wool medium, and those can be anywhere from, and I'm totally gonna get this wrong, so research it. I wanna say it's 12 cents per rock wool if you're buying them, or maybe just a little bit under if you're buying them in sheets from Tower Garden. I'm not sure about other companies. I prefer Tower Gardens. Or you are paying, I can pay as low as 8.5 cents, I believe. At the time of making this video, now costs change if I'm buying them in bulk, which is what I do. Then we have our electricity cost. So our cost of electricity depends on where you're located. I've seen it as low as $4 doing the math. I estimate that I spend about $6 per tower in electricity, and I round that up. I think it's probably less than that per tower per month when they're outside. When they're indoors, I double that number because of the lights. But I will put below in the description a link to my free ebook, and I have a whole chapter on the cost. It tells you the exact cost, the exact amount of electricity these use, so that you can find out your cost per kilowatts, I don't know how all that works, that you're paying if you want to know the exact cost. For the most part, the electricity usage is pretty minimal. The only time it gets just in the winter, it's a little bit higher for me because I have so many towers with so many lights on them, but even that, it's still minimal. So when I break down the cost, for example, to grow a bundle of lettuce, like a baby greens, I ran the cost and it's about 34 cents for me to grow a bundle of baby greens here in the garage in the winter. And 2 of those bundles is the equivalent of one of those plastic tubs at the grocery store. And those in our area are anywhere from $4 to about $6 if you're buying an organic tub of those. So 34 cents, twice like 70 cents. And I mean, even if you round it up to $1, that's still a significant savings. Not to mention I'm getting fresh greens that have all their nutrients intact, because greens lose nutrients really quickly. And so it's estimated that, you know, almost 90% of vitamin C is gone out of things like spinach after 3 days. And then nutrients out of lettuce can be down by 30% within 3 days. So the decline in the nutrients happens really fast. So the cost for me to buy baby greens is incredible compared to what I'm paying at the grocery store. Not to mention it's healthier. I don't have to worry about pesticides. All my nutrients are intact. I'm typically eating them from the tower to the table within a few minutes, so all the nutrients are intact. Now, is that the same cost across the board when growing on a tower? No. And it's not always the same cost growing across the board with things in the soil either. So let's say you want to grow eggplant, for example. Certain eggplants can take a really, really long time. You could be looking at, I've gone anywhere from like 5 months from seed to harvest of like a Black Beauty eggplant when growing outdoors in season on a tower. Same as in my soil gardens. I don't have a lot of success growing eggplants in my soil gardens, which is why I grow them on the towers, because I can't get them in the soil gardens. But that's a long time, so you have to add in the energy cost. Now it's only 1 grow port to grow the eggplant over that period of time. But does 5 months in a tower, feeding it nutrients, using power, does that make that eggplant more expensive than if you just went to the store and bought an eggplant? I would say they're probably pretty equal in price at the end of the day. And it does depend on the variety of eggplant. If I'm only gonna get 5 eggplant off a plant that can take 5 months, which is the case for some eggplants, then the cost is probably equivalent to if I just went and bought it at the grocery store. But again, with mine, I know where it came from. I'm harvesting at its peak. It's got all the nutrients intact. I get the experience of growing it, which there is a value in gardening, and you know, the experience of growing your own food. There is a connection to your food that I think is very valuable, and you can't really put a price on that. But I can also grow, and I like to teach this in a lot of my content, I can also grow something like a patio baby eggplant that matures a lot more quickly. It can mature within 40 days and can produce 50 or more little eggplants. They come up quickly. They are produced in an interval, so as you're harvesting one, another one's ripening, and so in a day or two you've got another one you can harvest. So that is a crop I can turn over very quickly, and I would say it cost me 1 penny per eggplant on a plant like a patio baby, food-wise. So there's a huge return on investment on something like that, just because that plant is so abundant and so consistent. And technically I can't even buy that variety at the grocery store. I've never seen it, so I get the uniqueness of this food that I can't get at the grocery store. So with something like that, absolutely, the cost is incredible. Similar to tomatoes. When you grow tomatoes, even in a pot, even if you bought the plant and you paid $6.95, which is what a tomato plant costs now, a start, which is so crazy to me. I remember when they were 99 cents for a tomato plant start. You can pay $6.95 now at our local Lowe's if you want a tomato plant start. And that is very expensive, but if you grew it in a pot and you had to add some good compost, you can get a ton of tomatoes depending on the variety of the tomato. You can get a ton of tomatoes off of that, and you probably equal out what you would pay at the grocery store, even on the high end of that. If you can start your own seeds, grow them in a tower. Again, we're talking about pennies per tomato. We can barely even apply a cost to something that is a heavy fruiting product like that. These are eggplants. So other costs associated with growing on a tower specifically would include net pots. We discussed rock wool, and in my ebook, again, I'll link that below, I do break this down. I estimated that I spend, I think like $10 a year on net pots. I recycle mine and use them until they are no more. So maybe a little bit more than that because I have more towers now, but it's very minimal, so I don't put a lot of emphasis on that. The nutrients would be the most expensive part to growing on the tower. And you buy a gallon of the A and the B solution together, and they are $65 as of making this video. Obviously that can always change. And Tower Garden says they last, I want to say Tower Garden says 9 to 12 months. I would say for me personally, I'm going through a gallon of each every 7 to 9 months, and it'll depend on what I'm growing on the towers and the time of year. Right now, I'm using very little water and nutrients to grow food. Things are growing slowly. It's winter. I'm not growing huge tomato plants. My peppers are all really small, so they're not sucking up a lot of stuff right now. I don't have huge pumpkins and winter squash growing right now. Those kinds of things are going to take up more water and more nutrients, and you're going to go through them faster. In the summer, obviously, I can be changing my water or adding water to my tank once a week and going through water pretty quickly. In the winter, not. So overall, I like to say my average time for using the gallon of both the A and the B is 7 to 9 months. So every 7 to 9 months, $65 is what I have to invest to get more nutrients to grow into the tower. When I worked out that cost for how much it cost me to grow the baby greens, I worked that into that cost. So that was a part of that 34 cents. So overall, to me, to grow on the towers, from my experience and putting it against my gardening history experience and what it costs to grow in the soil, it is far more affordable to grow in a tower than it is to grow in the soil if you are going to be adding amendments to make sure you're getting the quality of food. If you're going to be adding compost, like if you've got to build no-dig garden beds, the investment into keeping that compost well, or if you're doing raised beds. Now, if you're just going to till the land and grow a few things, obviously it may be less expensive to grow tomatoes that way because your investment is literally seeds, and that's about it at that point if you're not going to be adding amendments and things. But then there's also the cost of like waste when you're growing in the soil. So if you aren't going to add amendments and you're not going to invest in a proper watering system and you're not going to set up your outdoor gardens in a way that gives the plants the optimal things they need to grow, you're not going to get optimal food, right? You may get small cabbage. You may get smaller garlic. Garlic is a heavy feeder. It needs consistent watering. These things need certain things in order to be at their prime, so you get the most out of them. So there's also that way. I've gardened for many, many years where I wouldn't add those things in because I didn't want to invest in an automatic watering system because that's very expensive. So I'm hand watering. So am I getting the most out of the food? No, because I'm sacrificing the proper watering to grow the food. And I'm still growing it, and there's still tons of value in there. In some years, things are giant and one thing's small. And one year the cucumbers are insane, and the next you can't get any to grow because whatever's going on in the environment or in your water or in your soil, because I don't know, because I didn't test those things, because it's an investment to test them and it's an investment to fix them and all of that, and it's work. So you're kind of just like spitting in the wind with that and hoping you get a good harvest. Most gardeners do that. Very few home gardeners are really focused on the science and getting the maximum amount of their crops, unless they're just really experienced and they've been doing it for a long time and they know exactly what to add, which we all get there. Same thing with the towers. Like I can do things on the towers. Some people who are new to it can't, because of my experience with gardening and experience with the towers, right? I have found personally, I get more food and better quality food for most things off the towers because I can control everything. They're getting all the minerals, they're getting all the nutrients they need. I can turn the towers if something's not getting enough lighting. I can turn the towers or move the plant so that it gets the optimal everything it needs, where you can't always do that in a soil garden. Now, not all things grow amazing in the towers. Peas, for example, I've never been able to really maximize a huge harvest of like snap peas, because you need so many to grow to get the amount that I would want to harvest. So this is something I've decided I'm going to just do in my raised beds. I'm going to invest in another raised bed and get it set up because I value peas, and for a while I'm not going to have a return on that investment growing peas, but someday I will, because I know how to plant them from seed, and I'm doing things like worm composting so I can feed them without having to invest a lot in amendments and things like that. So to answer the question, is it worth the cost? Yes, definitely worth the cost. I believe the return on investment is listed at Tower Garden for this particular unit at 12 months. Don't hold me to that. They may not even have it anywhere. I've read 12 months somewhere as a return on investment. I would say that's about right. For me, it was shorter because I grow to juice, and to juice and purchase greens from the grocery store to juice is very, very, very expensive. So my return on investment was a little bit faster on some of these towers where I'm growing a lot of greens to juice for that reason. So if you're a juicer, a tower is for sure a no-brainer. They are an excellent investment to saving you a ton of money and making sure you get the best, most nutrient-dense greens into your juice, because obviously that's the goal for juicing. So, greenhouse peppers. So I would say your investment, return on investment, is anywhere from 7 months to a year and a half. And that's pretty wide, but I want to be realistic in giving you that number. And if you have gardening experience, or if you dive into my interval planting and you really grasp that concept and you're growing outdoors, you can get that down to 7 months. If you are growing indoors, you eat a ton of greens at the grocery store, and you practice my interval planting methods, because my methods are designed to get more food quickly by allowing our babies to get really large over here in the grow station before they go into the tower. So when they go into the tower, we're turning them over very quickly. I'm encouraging growing a lot of really fast growing things that are designed to replace the grocery store, like multi-seeding your greens, all of that. If you're following that and growing indoors, your return on investment is probably anywhere from, whatever, I said 7 months if you're juicing outside. I would say 7 to 9 if you're a juicer, using interval practice, using my interval methods, and you're growing outdoors part of the year. It doesn't have to be full time. You're at about 7 to 9 months before the tower will pay for itself and you start saving money. If you're growing indoors, same thing, interval planting, using a ton of greens, juicing, I would say you'd be more like 9 to 12 months because things grow slower indoors. You can increase that by increasing the amount of seeds that you start. I say to start seeds every 2 weeks and then harvest your food younger. My plants are inside. I'm gonna harvest a kohlrabi today that's only about this big. To me, that's totally fine because I need food. I've got other starts ready to go into the tower. A kohlrabi can get double that size, but I'm not willing to wait for it because it's more important for me to eat something fresh off my tower tonight than to sit and wait for that. So if you're following that method, I would say you're at the 9-month. And then if you're not following that method and you're letting things get to a full grown size, maybe 12 months. And then if you are just dabbling and you buy one tower and you're kind of dabbling with growing on it and it's not a super huge priority in your life to really master seed starting, so maybe you are purchasing seedlings from a a company that does tower garden seedlings. They're out there, just so you know, if you ever are interested in those. Then you might be at the 12 months to a year and a half, depending on how important growing food is to you and like how much you're investing into that. These are fun. Bulgarian carrot seeds. And obviously there's an investment in seeds. And obviously there's an investment in seeds too, and like I built that into my cost. I pay a little bit more for seeds because quality is super important. I have a free seed guide you can download, and I do have MI Gardener's link in there where you get a discount, and his seeds are so affordable. So make sure to download that guide. I'll put it in the description below. But I feel like I can invest more into really high quality seeds because my growing cost is lower, and I'm starting my own seeds, and I'm starting them frequently, and I'm turning my food over really quickly, and I'm eating things young in order to get food on the table, and starting a new plant to take its place. That all speeds up the process. To me personally, I would grow on the towers even if it costs double than the food at the grocery store. Just like I have paid double to grow food in my gardens in the past. Now I'm grateful that's not the case. And I really did get into this to tackle some of the cost because inflation is a real problem. And it's a problem for soil gardening too. It was a huge problem to just get the compost. Was so expensive in this area, and the quality, it was littered with plastics. Plastic feed bags had been shredded into it. And this was at the best place you can buy compost, like the local place that's known for the best quality compost. So to me, I would pay more to grow this way just because I know what's in my food. I have so much control over it. I can grow it year round. I'm not having to haul compost and do that heavy labor, but I'm super grateful. It is actually very, very cost effective to grow in a tower. For me personally, growing my own food outweighs the cost, even if it were to cost more to grow. And I've done that in my soil gardens because of what's going on with our food systems. And I grow food for taste. I grow food for health purposes. And this food is the healthiest food, or any kind of homegrown food, if you're growing in the soil, is going to be the healthiest because it's coming fresh right out of your gardens to your table, which just adds so much value, I think, nutrition wise, into our diets. And I personally, like, instead of buying supplements, you could just grow some of your own food. Even if it costs more, you would just get so much more out of that, in my opinion. I am grateful that overall, yes, it absolutely is worth the cost to grow your own food, as long as you use your tower. If you don't use it and you don't take the time to master how to use it, then obviously it's a waste of money. And don't waste your money if you're not willing to do the work required to learn how to use a tower and to grow your own food. But even if you didn't want to learn how to start your own seeds, obviously I'm doing this on a big scale. I'm preparing for over 15 towers to be growing on our property, plus raised beds. This is homesteading. This is replacing 90% of our food at the grocery store. So I'm doing this on a much bigger scale. Even if you didn't want to do that and you just wanted to purchase your seedlings from a seed starting company, from someone else who starts those seedlings, absolutely worth the cost. You would still save money, not to mention all the nutrients that you get to add into your diet. So I hope that explains the cost a little bit better, and just my thoughts on if it's worth the cost. Make sure to download my free ebook. I'll put it in the link below. If you want to see a breakdown, I get a little bit more specific with the math in there. But for me, like, you can't put a price on fresh food. And we also, one more thought on growing on the towers and if it's worth the cost. We also have the added advantage that even though sometimes it may seem like we're not getting much food off of a tower, because, you know, it is like a raised bed. One raised bed, if you buy one tower, that's not going to replace the grocery store. It's just, you know, whether it's in the ground or vertical, it's only so much food. But with the towers, we have the advantage over a raised bed in that they're year round. Like, I'm still growing right now. There's nothing growing outside in my gardens. It's not even spring yet. We're sort of in that false spring where it's nice out today, but I'm not growing any food outside right now, and I'm growing a ton of food in this garage right now. So that also goes into the longevity of growing on a tower and the savings you get, because if the tower is going to last your lifetime, let's say you're going to have, I know friends who've had them for 13 years, so let's just make that the number. If I'm going to grow on these for the next 13 years year round, that's a huge amount of savings over time. Even if there is inflation with seeds and inflation with rock wool and inflation with the nutrients, I'm still going to save an incredible amount of money over a 13-year span because I have the towers, I have the thing, and it's not going to go away. It's not going to wash down the mountain. It's not going to be depleted of anything. It's just here to serve when I'm ready to use it, which is all the time. So that makes a big difference too. The year round, instead of being limited to even a 3-month growing season, adding 4 extra months of food harvest is a huge, huge savings. For me personally, growing your own food, I think, is so critical to our health and wellness, to the health and wellness of our planet, to our food security, and our ability to really have a say in what we're eating and what we have access to. Yeah, you can't put a price on those things. So I hope that answers some of your questions on the cost. For me personally, like, growing your own food is so important that it's worth the investment. It's worth the work. And thankfully, it does pay off in this situation. But even if it didn't, I'd be here doing it anyway.